Welcome back to another episode of Flawless Plan Garage, where today we are working on this, my 1994 Buick Roadmaster station wagon, into which I am attempting to cram a 6.6 liter Duramax Diesel V8 and Allison transmission, which really does not fit very well. But what we are going to do today is we're going to attempt to convert the fuel system, which as usual, I'm going to make as complicated and ridiculously over difficult as possible, to switch this gasoline powered vehicle over to a diesel powered one, including filters and a fuel cooler and the whole nine. But before we get started with today's action, I've got to tell you about today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by socks. Do you have holes in your socks? Well then, if not, how do you get your feet into them? Yes, he wrote the intro. Yeah. I know I should probably use like AI, but instead I'm using a 7-year-old to write my intro jokes. You're welcome. Stay tuned. So I decided what I really wanted to do was a nice water separator filter and small micron filter setup along with the lift pump to make sure that I'm getting clean fuel out of the tank and into the LB7 Duramax. And so I have 2 of these filter bases and 2 filters about the size. This is the first one here that would be the water separator and filter. And I need to plumb those in somewhere. And I had thought that I would be able to put them, like here on the chassis somewhere, let them hang down, still have decent access from underneath the car, and roughly, similar to where the tank kind of goes back there, so kind of in the right spot. However, I really don't have room for them here because the body of the wagon, drops down right away for the back seat. So that, that kind of comes down pretty close right here. Then the stock mufflers lay flat, or resonators or something kind of lay flat in here. But there's not enough room, from there down. If I put them here hanging down, I'm going to lose ground clearance. So that's not going to work. Can't really, put them sideways because the water separator relies on gravity, needs to be upright. Can't really put them in the frame here because also, here, the body of the car drops down so that the floor is nice and low inside. So once again, my stubbornness about not being willing to do a body lift is biting me in the tuchus. I tried to find a place to put them on this side too, and there really isn't much of a place over here either. I need room for the 4-link. I need room for the exhaust pipe or pipes. Probably will be on this side, still need to figure that out, but the exhaust pipe's probably going to need to come through here and go over the axle. And there's not really room to feel good about over here. So then we think about, okay, what about wheel wells? Got to be some room there somewhere. Well, on that side, we've got the spare tire well, which I don't want to give up. I really want to be able to have a spare tire still. On this side, we do have kind of a cubby hole inside. And that cubby hole, could go down further if needed. I could make it deeper and still have it hidden behind the fender or the quarter panel there. So I think this is probably going to be our winner. Even in its current state, you'll notice like if I put it up top of if I could get these mounted up to that top of that cubby, they would still hang down below the fender by a few inches. Now the spare tire well also hangs down actually below the fender by a few inches. So this is probably okay in terms of ground clearance, but I don't really want them showing under the back of the car. I'd prefer to have them hidden visually. So I think what I'm going to need to do is cut up this cubby hole and raise it a little bit to fit these. But also I would like to have room for a second battery back here potentially. So I might be raising part of it for the filters and lowering other part of it for a battery. It's time to start taking a better look inside to see what we're dealing with and how much sheet metal work I'm going to need to kind of creatively re-engineer back here. And with the plastic and covers removed here from the cubby hole area, it is pretty deep. You know, it's a good 8 inches or so below kind of the floor level here. So there is quite a bit of space to work with. And I think, you know, obviously it goes down even deeper there next to the fender. So I think we can work with this. It's going to be a matter of getting this cut out and designing a new shape to do all the things I want to do. And after several hours of cutting, I gotta say, once again, cutting something this absolutely perfect and completely rust-free breaks my heart. But it's out. And so now we have room to get in here and get started making something new. And after multiple hours over several weeks, I have performed sheet metal alchemy and turned cardboard into steel. So we got a battery tray goes down inside, and we have the filter mount on this side. Still need to figure out how I'm actually going to mount all the filters on here, but we've got some bead rolling, some flanges. This is very thick sheet metal. It's significantly thicker than the original stuff. So this is beefy. Should be nice and strong. Hopefully it all fits. And here is what I'm planning for the filter layout. So first of all, you have to imagine that this is upside down. So now we're hanging this stuff just in front of the rear wheel on the driver's side. And this is the portion of my new box that is designed to give room and headroom essentially by cutting out some of the cubby space inside the back of the wagon and giving space under the car for this filter arrangement. I definitely did not have room for a standard, you know, fast setup, which is where these things are all kind of done in line. So usually when you see these on the truck, they're kind of set up this way on a big plate because the truck has lots of room on the chassis, and I couldn't do that. So the plan here, flawless as ever, is something like this. So the pump is here. It will draw through this filter and water separator. So we'll go from the fuel tank to here via AN line, a very short piece of hose right here. Not AN because I didn't have room for all the fittings. Another very short piece of hose right here. Also not AN, again, because I didn't really have room. I think I can arrange them so I have a pretty straight shot for those two little lengths of hose. Then through this filter and out to the motor via AN line again. Now I am still going to have the factory filter and water separator on the motor here. So fuel should be extremely well filtered. So I realized that I really was going to have a hard time painting this surface once it was in the car. I can get seam sealer and stuff in there, I think, fine, but to be able to shoot any paint on the backside here would be almost impossible because of the way it'll be once it's in. So I put a little paint on this, knowing, yes, it's going to get burned when I weld in around the edges, but I can shoot down from the top, hopefully, to get those corners, and then it'll be seam sealed very thoroughly everywhere through here as well. And the battery tray, this is another, just a stock Roadmaster battery tray that I got used. Blasted it down to clean white metal, then primed it with some weld-through primer. Of course, I had to do some repair work to get a new stud over here. The plan for this is to weld this down here to what will be that new floor segment, essentially, down at the bottom of the car, so that this can be my new battery hold down for the second battery, since the diesel really prefers to have two. Note that what I plan to do here is using an AGM battery because those don't require venting. They don't gas in an enclosed space. So that way it'll make it safe to have inside the passenger compartment of the car. So this one will be AGM. I don't know what I'll do for the other battery yet, but we'll deal with that later. And yeah, just need to decide if I'm going to do it this way or this way, kind of how to space it. I'll make sure to do it in a way that is maximally difficult for me to get the battery out later. So I'll have to think about which way is going to be the biggest pain in my butt. After that, this box really should be ready to weld in. I have to say I'm relatively happy with the way it's come out, but I am definitely nervous about doing this. Again, this car is just too nice to have been subjected to the level of cutting I'm putting on it, but there's no turning back now. Easily my favorite part on a project like this is welding anything that's overhead. Like this floor box that we're working on. Nothing more fun than just constantly getting peppered with sparks and burned, and it just goes everywhere. So I've got approximately the same number of burns as I do actual tack welds into this project so far, and they're nicely kind of evenly distributed. Arms, back, shoulders, legs, knees, feet, inner thighs. It's a lot of fun. I know. Get a welding jacket, get the proper gear, rather than just adding more layers and flipping collars up and hoping for the best. I will say that I learned some years ago, insulated flannel shirts, really bad idea. Man, those things aren't just flammable, they're like made of accelerant. they burn really fast, like faster than you can get them taken off. I lost a couple that way, and I learned that lesson. I quit wearing flannel shirts for this job. Whatever this work shirt kind of material is made out of seems vastly superior in that when it does, get a hole in it or something, it doesn't spread. It doesn't really ignite, other than just kind of burning and melting a bit here and there. And yeah, I know, proper gear would be the right answer here. But of course, I only have this one little bit more to do, and then, it's not worth spending hundreds of dollars on welding jackets for just this one little piece until the next time. And then there'll be a time after that. And yeah, you know how this goes. And so eventually I will put like all the splash shields back in place here in the wheel well. But as you can see, things tuck up underneath pretty nicely. And I've got my ketchup and mustard, both the small filter and the water separator, the big filter, and then that lift pump will go in between them. So obviously just tacked in place for now, but a little bit more welding, quite a bit of seam sealer, a few licks of paint, and I think we're going to be in decent shape here on the back end. Okay, flawless plan for the fuel tank. This is the original pump and cover plate, whatever you want to call this. Plan is to ditch the pump and then in the cover plate here, cut some of these guys off, drill, and install bulkhead fittings for the AN lines, and then replace, instead of this basket assembly, just have a pickup tube that drops down in the tank, which will then have the lift pump pulling from it. Should get a much larger fuel line and pickup tube this way for higher volume, and do away with the in-tank pump for diesel. And after a significant amount of fiddling, here is my attempt at the new fuel pickup. So a little paint on here. We've got the outlet, the AN8, and the inlet or the return with the AN6. We've got the original harness still on here, so I can hopefully still use the same fuel level sender, and all that wiring can remain unaltered. I have capped the one remaining like fuel line here. That was, I believe, the return line. I have left the vent line on it. No need to go to a charcoal canister anymore since it'll be full of diesel, but that way I can kind of loop a line off of there up high somewhere for a tank vent. Maybe the cap is vented too, but at least I'm covered that way. And we're going to work on putting this up into its home. The thing I'm not sure about yet is whether I need additional clearance, because these fittings do stick up a little bit higher than the original lines did. So we're going to do some test fitting, see if it'll actually work up in there, or if I have to do some more minor body modifications up there. Well, good news, bad news as usual. Put a little grease on top of these fittings to see if it transferred to the body, and it did not. Things are still dry and clean up here. So I think we're clear there. Bad news is that in this section, there's a little bit of a notch in the tank here for the original steel lines. And this surface almost touches the body right here. So there's really only about 1/4 of an inch of space between, in this valley for these lines. And that's not enough for an AN8 line. So I'm going to take a little massaging, I think. Now, there is both an art and a science to shaping sheet metal properly, and I have no idea what either of those are. But I do have a sledgehammer, and we made some dents with the sledgehammer. We'll find out if that's enough. Kind of mocked up the AN line coming out of that fitting. We'll see if it looks like it'll actually fit now. Okay, I think we have room. I mean, I got the camera on it, but I can't get my head up here, so you're going to have to tell me. I'm just going by feel. But I think we're good. Oh, all the little things you don't think about when starting a project. Well, you need some way to route fuel lines, right? These are massive 8 AN feed and 6 AN return compared to the original tiny little nylon fuel lines. These are significantly larger. So I need some way to clip them and retain them. And I'd prefer, if possible, not to use metal and therefore encourage things to rust. So what I decided to do, the factory frame has a bunch of these little 2-hole setups in various locations throughout the chassis. And they used clips, not entirely dissimilar to this one, to go inside the frame, located using those holes, and then clip the lines down. Now, this one's from a brake line, so it's tiny. The fuel line ones obviously were a little bit larger, but not significantly so. Well, needed something better than the factory setup. So this is a 3D printed design. Big time thanks to Dustin for helping me with this and actually printing these for me and doing the hard work. This is a prototype. Should be able to print the real stuff in nylon when the time comes. But as you can see, this is set up to take a 8 AN line for the feed, a 6 AN for the return, and even that 1/4 inch brake line. Retain them all. Has a little pin where it goes into the chassis. Has a little hex recess there, so I can use some small stainless bolts to bolt the 2 halves of this clip together. And then the plan was a riv nut into the frame right here, and the whole thing is supposed to go in something, you know, like so, and attach to the frame. Easily one of my most flawless plans to date, especially because, number one, I got the dimensions wrong, so the pin is in the wrong spot for the various frame retaining areas. And while actually it would fit pretty nicely right here, and maybe even up in there, attached to the frame up in there, the problem becomes for the rest of this length, there is just not enough room between the body and the frame to get these things in where I had intended. Just not even close. So this is one more flawless plan in the bin. Also, let's have a look here at the fuel tank routing. So we're gonna come out of the tank, come across. So we're coming out of the tank, across here, go above the fuel filler tubes, drop down over here, loop up into my fancy schmancy filter arrangement, then come out of the filter arrangement, loop back up into here, go over the suspension part of the frame, and then follow the frame rail all the way forward. So far we've got this line made. This goes from the tank to the filter assembly. Then there'll be some small bits going from the filter to the pump, from the pump to the other filter. Then we're routing this line. It's about the right length right now to go from there up over the chassis, all the way down the rail, head up toward the engine, and come up to where it's right here. The fuel line's up there. I'm like 2 feet short on the AN line that I bought. Guess I'm ordering some more AN line. Brackets, 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 making up some brackets. Okay, well, I think we're making progress. So, fuel cooler mounted, some riv nuts, and then that becomes part of the bracket for the power steering cooler. I think I will window this to just get a little bit more airflow just in case. Then some little brackets here to hold the trans cooler, and all of them situated in such a way as that the lines can pass by the AC condenser. I'll have another 90 on this. These lines will pass through here. I've got a little bit more trimming. I'm going to trim some clearance here, trim some clearance here for this line. I might even trim some of this off the AC condenser just to make sure I have room for any thermal expansion without rubbing on my fittings. But yeah, overall, I think the front coolers are mounted. And so then after making a lot more AN lines and buying quite a bit more, I can now come from the ketchup and mustard all the way forward to the inlet here at the motor that's then going to go through the stock filter, which you can kind of see if it would focus. There we go, over there. And all the existing pump stuff, and then the discharge or the return system coming out here to the fuel cooler, which will be mounted right up here. Go into that and then come back out of it past this handy dandy broom hood holder. Anyway, so then it'll go back from the fuel cooler all the way back to the return line at the tank, all with custom AN lines and the finest, cheapest Chinese AN fittings I could find. What could possibly go wrong with that? Obviously none of it pressure tested yet, but I have all the lines made. Still need to figure out some clips to hold it all properly along the way. Might still end up doing some 3D printing on something, but for the moment we're going to call that complete on the fuel system. I do actually have a fuel system. Does it work? I have no idea. Will it hold pressure? I really have no idea. Will it pump fuel where it needs to? Again, no idea. But it's a fuel system, so we're calling it a win for now. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.